His last wish before execution was to see his dog, but what happened changed everything. Raymond Cole had accepted his fate with quiet resignation for 12 years. Every dawn was a painful repetition of the previous one, imprisoned between the cold and soulless walls of cell B17 in the prison, where time did not move forward. It only weighed heavily. He was sentenced to death for a murder he had always denied committing. But over the years the court stopped listening, lawyers withdrew, and his voice became a barely audible echo. With hair grey before its time and eyes sunken from sleepless nights, Ray no longer fought for his life, only for a bit of peace between those walls of concrete and constant surveillance. He had learned to rid himself of everything: hope, anger, injustice, everything except one memory: Honey. She was more than a pet. She was his family, his shelter, his comfort in the worst moments. He found her on the street when she was only a frightened ball of fur, and raised her with tenderness. She was with him in his good days, and accompanied him when life hurt. And although the world forgot about him, he never stopped thinking about her, wondering if she was alive, if she remembered him, if she was still waiting for him somewhere. When the prison warden approached with an official form asking about his last wish before execution, Ray did not hesitate. He did not ask for luxury or exquisite food or spiritual comfort. He looked at the warden with a mixture of calm and sadness and said, "I want to see my dog." At first, the prison staff received this as another eccentricity of a defeated man, a melancholic and impossible request. But there was something in the way he said it, a sincerity that could not be faked, an emptiness impossible to fill, that made even guards hardened by years of routine lower their eyes, uncomfortable before the humanity that still survived in this condemned man. No one knew it yet, but this simple request would mark the beginning of a chain of events that would change everything. Honey was taken to the county animal shelter the same afternoon that Raymond was arrested. She understood nothing. That morning she had gone for a walk with her owner, happy as always, wagging her tail as she trotted beside him. But suddenly patrols arrived, men in uniforms, shouting, confusion. Ray was handcuffed without explanation before her, and when she tried to run to him, an officer grabbed her collar and put her in a van. From that moment her world collapsed. In the shelter, she did not bark, did not eat, or even react to other dogs. For entire days she remained in absolute silence, lying with her head down as if refusing to exist. The caretakers thought she would not last long. The kind of sadness she showed was not common. It was the loss of something deep, someone who was her everything. The tag on her collar said, "Honey, property of Raymond Cole." Volunteers tried to contact family or friends, but there was no response. Ray's case was then in all the news, and some workers whispered among themselves that no one would want to adopt a murderer's dog. Despite this, Honey never lost the habit of approaching the shelter door at the end of the day. She would sit there straight, waiting, sometimes for hours, as if she knew that one day her human would come for her. But days passed, then weeks, then years, and then Angela appeared. She started as a volunteer at the shelter and had a gift for connecting with difficult animals. She saw Honey in her cage, so calm and sad at the same time, and felt something immediate. She asked to take her for a walk, and although at first the dog showed no interest, something changed after a few meetings. When she was moved to the restroom for evaluation, Angela sat beside her for hours. She did not speak, did not try to pet her without permission, only shared the silence. In that silence, Honey gradually settled on her legs. It was the beginning of something beautiful. Angela adopted her initially thinking it would be temporary, a way to avoid euthanasia. But months passed, and she became very attached. Even so, she never stopped noticing that Honey had sadness etched in her eyes. She slept close to the door, was frightened by the sound of sirens, and some nights whimpered in her sleep. One night, while petting her, Angela noted the tag on her collar and decided to look up the name out of curiosity. R. Cole. Typing the full name into the internet, she found old articles about the case. A man accused of murder, sentenced to death. One headline caught her attention. Raymond Cole arrested in front of his home. Dog had to be forcibly removed. Angela felt a knot in her throat. Was it possible? Was this the same man she had read about in the newspapers, and the man Honey had never forgotten? Weeks later, she received a phone call that seemed to come from a dream. It was from the state prison. An officer explained that a death row inmate named Raymond Cole had requested as his last wish to see his dog, and that they had found Honey through the number registered in her microchip. Angela froze. She did not know what to say. Would she take this dog she had learned to love to meet with a man who was going to die? What impact would this have on her and on him? But when she looked at Honey, who observed her with those deep eyes carrying years of waiting, she no longer hesitated. She agreed to the day, signed the papers and planned the trip. Honey did not know where she was going, but seemed restless, as if sensing something important. In the back seat of the car, she looked through the window, not taking her eyes off the road. When they arrived at the prison, the staff received them with curious looks. They had never received such a wish before. Angela held the leash tightly, while guards explained that the meeting would be brief and under strict supervision. But no one, absolutely no one, was prepared for what would happen when Honey saw Ray for the first time in over a decade. This moment, which began as an act of compassion, would change the course of their lives and trigger something much bigger than anyone could have imagined. Ray was escorted to the inner courtyard of the penitentiary complex, with handcuffs on his wrists, flanked by 2 guards who maintained a steady and alert pace. His face reflected a strange calm, as if expecting nothing, as if he had already accepted that this meeting would only be a last echo of the past before the end. He wore a grey uniform, an unkempt beard, and his eyes were sunken from years. 1,000 times he had practiced in his head what he would say, how he would react, but in reality, he did not know what to feel. His hands trembled, although no one noticed. The courtyard was empty except for figures in the distance, Angela with Honey at her side. She held the leash tightly, while the dog panted nervously, as if sensing something beyond what was visible. Then it happened. Honey raised her head, sniffed the air and froze for a second, her eyes fixed on Ray. She did not hesitate. With a sharp whine and unexpected force, she broke free from the leash and ran with all her strength toward him. The guards tried to react, tense, but the warden raised his hand and indicated for them to wait. Ray fell to his knees on the ground just as she reached him. Honey threw herself at him, crying, whining, pushing him with her head, licking his face, neck, handcuffed hands. He completely broke down. He could not contain himself. He buried his face in the golden fur, holding onto her like a part of himself that had died years ago. He cried with deep desperation, without words, as if all the pain held for so long came out suddenly in this body-to-body embrace. The guards watched in silence. Even the sternest lowered their eyes. Some murmured that they had never seen anything like it. The warden, who had decades of experience, swallowed with difficulty. He had witnessed many farewells, many announced deaths, but never a meeting with such truth. Honey did not leave even for a second. She lay down beside him, resting her head on his knees, closing her eyes peacefully. It was as if both had returned to the only place where they had ever been happy. The clock showed 10 minutes, the time limit, but no one said anything when it ended. 15 minutes passed, then 20, and no one interrupted. The guards knew this moment would not repeat itself. It was an act of humanity that went beyond regulations. Angela watched from afar with tears streaming down her cheeks. She understood at that moment that what connected this man with this dog was not just memory or habit. It was pure love. Love of the kind that would survive prison, oblivion, injustice. It was as if, for a moment, the entire brutal punishment system stopped before the simple force of loyalty. Then something more happened. When Honey calmed down, she began to behave strangely. She stood up and positioned herself between Ray and one of the guards, the one who was closest. She remained motionless, looking at him attentively with raised ears and a tense body. She growled first quietly, then louder. Guard Mendel, one of the most experienced, tried to joke, saying that maybe she smelled his lunch, but Honey did not relax. She did not take her eyes off him, as if her instinct detected something. Angela felt a chill. Honey had reacted this way only once during all the years she had known her. It was when they met a man in the park, who later turned out to be an animal abuser. At that moment, not knowing why, Angela understood that this meeting was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning of something deeper, something hidden, that time, memory, and the dog's faithfulness would soon reveal. Honey's behavior left everyone puzzled. She remained motionless between Ray and Guard Mendel with tense muscles, fixed gaze and persistent growling that sounded like a clear warning. Ray, who perfectly knew his dog's body language, immediately knew this was not an impulsive reaction or fear. It was a signal. Honey was protecting him. Guard Mendel tried to approach, raising his hands in a calming gesture, but Honey took a step back and growled louder, showing her teeth. The other officers began to worry, and the warden approached cautiously to calm the situation. Angela, concerned, quickly intervened, calling Honey by name and crouching to calm her. Honey responded to her voice, but did not take her eyes off Mendel. Her eyes gleamed with something more than emotion. It was absolute distrust. Later, already outside the courtyard, the warden requested a private meeting with Angela. He asked if the dog had ever shown similar behavior. Angela, still shaken, told him what had happened in the park years ago with the animal abuser. "She doesn't react like this without reason," she said firmly. That night, the warden, a man accustomed to dealing with hard facts and convincing evidence, could not get Honey's attitude out of his head. With curiosity and unease he could not explain, he requested that Cole's complete case file be brought. Not summaries, not conclusions, but everything. Testimonies, police reports, conversation recordings, trial transcripts. The same guard, Mendel, was the first to arrive at the crime scene, and also the main witness who claimed to have seen Ray leaving the house where the murder occurred. It was his testimony that tipped the jury's scales. The next morning, the warden reviewed the reports again with greater attention. Something did not add up. The times given by Mendel did not match the telephone reports from neighbors. The emergency call was registered almost 20 minutes before the time Mendel testified. Furthermore, a traffic camera, whose recordings were never used in the trial, showed Ray in another location, at exactly the same moment when, according to Mendel, he was leaving the crime scene. How was it possible that this was ignored? Why did no one question this? Moved by a mixture of moral duty and increasingly disturbing curiosity, the warden decided to contact a young defense attorney, Tomas Guerrero, who had shown interest in reviewing old cases for possible judicial errors. He handed him the files with a simple phrase, "Review this with an open mind. Something is not right." Tomas spent the entire night on the case. The more he read, the more surprised he became. Mendel's testimony was inconsistent. The circumstantial evidence was weak. There was no DNA, no fingerprints, only the testimony of one officer and a poorly constructed sequence of events. The case against Raymond Cole was based on a thin and fragile column of paper. The lawyer, intrigued and angered by the obvious negligence, decided to act. Honey, without knowing it, had lit the spark. A simple growl, a visceral reaction, was triggering a complete review of a case that had been closed for over a decade. While Ray returned to his cell with his heart full after that meeting he thought would be his last, outside a quiet machine began to move, driven by the intuition of a dog who had never forgotten the truth. No one knew it yet, but Honey's loyalty was about to change her owner's fate and reveal a truth buried by years of silence and indifference. Tomas Guerrero, seeing the scale of inconsistencies in the case, not only felt outrage, he felt personal involvement. He had never handled a death penalty case, but something in his heart told him this was not just a judicial error, but a deep injustice, where a man had been forgotten and buried alive by a system that swore to protect him. He assembled a small team of volunteers, young lawyers, law students, and investigative journalists, and together they dove into the documents as if solving a crime in real time. The team discovered details that were shocking. The alleged fingerprints found at the crime scene were partial, with no exact match to Ray. The murder weapon was never recovered. The original coroner's report had been edited and did not match the signed copy that appeared in internal archives. It was obvious. Someone had forced the puzzle pieces to fit. Meanwhile, in prison, Ray lived each day as if it were his last. He had no idea what was happening outside. His days were limited to the grey cell, conversations with chaplains, silences that weighed like stones. But something had changed in him since he saw Honey. He was no longer a man waiting for death. He was a man who remembered what it meant to love and be loved. Every night he closed his eyes and imagined her scent, the warmth of her body, the sound of her paws on the floor. He had no hope for freedom, but he had one last pure image, the image of his dog jumping into his arms. Outside, the story continued to grow like fire in dry grass. The journalist working with Tomas, Valeria Mendoza, managed to contact one of the original jury members from the case. She interviewed him in secret and discovered something shocking. Several jury members had doubts during the trial, but they were under pressure from the prosecutor and the speed of the trial because the case had media attention. "They wanted to close the case quickly," the man said. "They made us feel like if we didn't convict, the murderer would go free." This testimony was recorded and presented along with the appeal motion, strengthening the request to reopen the case. The court accepted the appeal and scheduled an urgent hearing. Tomas presented all the gathered evidence. The jury testimony, time inconsistencies, ignored traffic camera recording, suspicious behavior of Officer Mendel, new expertise that contradicted the original. The state prosecutor tried to object, but public pressure was enormous, and the media had made Raymond Cole's case a symbol of system failures. The story of a man wrongfully convicted, whose dog waited for 12 years, moved millions. Networks were flooded with messages demanding justice not only for Ray, but for all who were victims of flawed trials. During the hearing, Ray was brought to testify. It was the first time he had spoken publicly in years. Before judges, cameras, and his lawyer, he said with a firm but broken voice, "They took my life, but they could never take the memories of her. Honey doesn't know law, but she knows truth. She waited for me all this time, because in her heart, she knew I wasn't guilty. And if anyone still doubts, let them look into her eyes, because she was never wrong about me." Complete silence fell. No one breathed. Days later, the judge ruled in favor of reopening the trial, suspended the death sentence indefinitely, and ordered an investigation into the actions of Officer Mendel, who was placed on forced leave while criminal proceedings against him began. He was charged with perjury and obstruction of justice. Raymond Cole did not go free that day, but for the first time in 12 years he felt that time was moving again, that the cell was not his grave, but an interruption. Outside, Angela embraced Honey and whispered with a trembling voice, "You did it. You accomplished it." And Honey, not understanding human words, responded as she always did, with faithful silence, a calm look that said more than 1,000 voices, loyalty that never wavered, even before the darkest wall of all, injustice. After the court's decision to reopen the case, the atmosphere inside and outside the prison changed radically. What had previously been a story buried under years of oblivion became a living example that truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to come to light. Tomas Guerrero, with the ruling in his favor, completely immersed himself in preparing a full defense, no longer as an appeal, but as a battle for Raymond Cole's definitive exoneration. The team finally gained access to internal archives that had previously been sealed by the prosecution. Among them appeared a rejected ballistics report that confirmed the type of weapon used did not match any object associated with Ray. But even more shocking was the appearance of a recording of an anonymous phone call made after the crime, where a male voice said, "Know that the arrested man was not the real perpetrator." This call was never investigated. Tomas sent the recording to a forensic analysis laboratory, and the voice partially matched Officer Mendel. The discovery was devastating. Meanwhile, in prison, Ray began receiving letters of support from across the country. People moved by his story sent him drawings of Honey, poems, photos of their own dogs. For the first time, his name was not associated only with the act of a convict, but a man with a face, story, and love. Guards who previously barely looked at him now greeted him with respect. One of them even approached and said, "Your dog taught us more than anyone here could ever say." Ray said little, only wrote in his cell. He began drafting a journal, a memoir for Honey. Every day he wrote a memory with her, from when she was a puppy to that wonderful meeting. He said it didn't matter whether he got out or not, because his soul already felt at peace. She had looked at him as if nothing had changed, as if the whole world hadn't tried to kill him. That look, he said, restored his life. Angela and Honey were invited to a national television program. There she told the full story through tears. Honey, now calmer, sat through the entire interview, looking at the audience as if she knew they were talking about her. When the host asked what made her bite through the leash and run to Ray that day, Angela simply replied, she felt it was her moment, that he needed her. Images of the meeting were shown on screen, and many people cried live. The story stopped being just a court case. It was a symbol of love and unwavering loyalty. Days later, as Tomas prepared the final request to declare Ray innocent and close the case with his release, something unexpected happened. A former prisoner who had shared a cell years ago with an acquaintance of Mendel appeared at the lawyer's office with a confession. He claimed he heard that man boast about helping a friend in the police solve a big problem by planting evidence against an innocent person to take pressure off the precinct. Although the testimony was indirect, it was enough to reopen the criminal investigation against those originally responsible for the case. The state prosecutor, under public pressure, was forced to issue formal apologies for negligence in the original investigation. A new hearing was scheduled for the following week. This time, Ray was to be heard not as an accused, but as a victim of the system. And while everyone prepared for this crucial day, Honey slept peacefully next to Angela, as if she knew her mission was not over yet. but that each step brought her human closer to where he should always be, free, at home, with her. When the judge issued the order to overturn the conviction, at that exact moment, it was as if time stopped for everyone present. This was not just the release of a wrongfully convicted man, but the cleansing of a name that had been stained for 12 years by indifference, error and neglect of a system more concerned with closing cases than doing justice. Raymond Cole, with trembling shoulders, could not believe what he had just heard. He had waited too long, cried in silence through endless years, learned not to deceive himself so as not to die of disappointment. But now, all of that was behind him. Not by luck, not by miracle, but by the stubborn loyalty of a dog who would not accept being forgotten. Tomas Guerrero, with tears in his eyes, not only felt relief, but pride. He knew he had saved a life, but also understood that what had happened transcended all professional logic. This was a battle fought by something more powerful than law, something no book teaches. Honey's loyalty was a beacon that attracted everyone involved toward a truth no one was looking for anymore. Every step in the case began with that quiet scene in the visiting room, when an old dog threw herself at her human without hesitation, without fear, without forgetting. That image changed everything. It awakened the humanity of the prison warden. It pushed a young assistant to use her social media. It moved thousands of hearts to share, protest, demand. It was, without exaggeration, a blow of pure bond that ignited the engine of true justice. Outside, when Ray crossed the courthouse gates and saw Honey, the whole world witnessed a scene that did not seem of this world. She did not run like an ordinary animal. She ran as if every second without him was a countdown. She jumped with force, hit his chest and whined between licks as if trying to tell him she would never leave him alone again. He held her with trembling arms and fell to his knees, embracing her as if trying to recover all the years that had been stolen from them. It was a scene that flooded social media and the press, but beyond the media noise it was an explosion of love that no one on that street would ever forget. In that embrace there was no rage or resentment, only forgiveness, relief and deep recognition that deep down they had survived because of what they felt for each other. The following days were full of requests, interviews, tributes. Prisoner rights organizations contacted him. Universities wanted him to tell his story. Publishers offered him contracts. But Ray rejected almost everything. He accepted only one interview, in which he clearly stated that he was not a hero or a victim seeking fame. He was just an ordinary man who had been robbed of life and who was saved by the purest love he had ever known. He accepted one offer, a small house in the countryside, fully furnished thanks to anonymous donations. That's where he settled with Honey, away from noise, close to peace. For the first time in over a decade, he slept with an open window, without bars, without lights on 24 hours. He woke to the sound of wind, not to the metallic noise of cell doors. Honey slept at the foot of his bed, calm, with an expression that said, "We're home now." Every afternoon, Ray sat on the porch with a notebook. He began writing a book, not as an accusation, but as a testimony of love. He titled it, "The Dog Who Saved Me." In it, he told how he met Honey, what their life was like together before the arrest, what each night in prison was like with the memory of her gaze, and how that moment of meeting restored something he thought was lost forever, hope. He wrote not for the world, but for her, as a way to thank her, as a way to immortalize her. He said that if he died one day, he wanted everyone to know that it was not a legal appeal or a brilliant lawyer who saved him, but a faithful heart that waited without conditions, without questions, without forgetting who he really was. Ray and Honey's story was used in universities as an example of what the judicial system should protect. It was studied by legislators who began discussing new measures to prevent unjust sentences from going so far. But he was not looking to be a symbol of anything. He just wanted to live quietly, free, with his dog, and that's what he did. Honey's last years of life were lived as a gift. They walked together, slept together, ate together, and when she began to weaken, Ray did not leave for a second. One afternoon, feeling her breathing with difficulty, he held her in his arms, whispered "thank you" in her ear, and stayed with her until her heart stopped beating. He cried yes, like never before, but it was not a sad farewell. It was the perfect closing of a story, in which, although the world failed him, a dog's love was enough to redeem everything. Because Honey did not just wait for him. She saved him, sustained him, and returned him to the place where he should always be, free, loved, and human.